We all have those special albums in our lives, and here are the 10 records that made me the cheery, well-adjusted chap that I am today. Let's get into it, shall we? As I said in my introduction, we all have those special albums that accompany those significant milestones. Might even be the album milestones itself if jazz is your thing. Music that shaped the way we think, our development, the tightness of trouserage, dance moves attempted, or even our first fondle, preferably with somebody else being there. Or those anthems that guided us through the weepier passages. I think you get the point I'm making. In this video I want to list 10 albums that fundamentally changed my life. And stick around to the end for a few honourable mentions. Number 10 is Neil Young and Live Rust. This is one of the first live albums I was introduced to. I'm not a huge fan of live albums generally, but I love this record. I love the poetic dalliances, the allusions, and the contemptuous sneer. It's better to burn out than to fade away, the needle and the damage done, and Cortez the killer. This music spoke to my 15-year-old self in a way that my mother's Pat Boone and Dusty Springfield records never could. Full of grit, grunge, and strange facial hair. This started me on an odyssey of exploring Neil Young's catalogue, as well as an appreciation for other singer-songwriters. Introduced me to all the whiny stuff, shall we say. Number 9 is the Beatles' White Album. This album really knocked me for six, the ramshackle jumble of it all. I used to listen to my mother's Beatles records, 7-inch singles, I Want to Hold Your Hand or From Me to You, but nothing prepared me for Helter Skelter and Dear Prudence. I came to understand the dramatic metamorphosis that this band had undergone, but also the massive shift throughout the 60s, which was such a vibrant time for music, and how culturally significant it all was. Plus the sheer starkness of the packaging, which contrasted quite oddly with the rather gaudy album covers from those 80s albums that my sister used to collect. It was all about substance over style. I loved the sound of Ringo's drums, that faux western accent in Rocky Raccoon, even the scrape of that guitar string at the end of Long, Long, Long. Bloody marvellous stuff. Number 8 is Motorhead's No Sleep to Hammersmith. This album thundered into my life. I remember Rolling Stone magazine once describing The Who's Live at Leeds as a holocaust of sound. With this album was a seismic oral shock for me. I'd never heard anything so undecorated, so raw, so bloody ugly as well. I loved the heavy riffage and that unrelenting rumble of drums. Not to mention the artwork itself and that gorgeous gold vinyl. We Are the Road Crew, Bomber, No Class. Indeed. I got to see Motorhead live in 1985, ears still ringing. Number 7 is Kiss and Destroyer. First saw this band on Entertainment USA, a programme fronted by Jonathan King here in the UK, way back in the 1980s, when I was a wee lad in short trousers. This band looked like something not of this earth. They just totally blew me away. I mean, I was used to listening to my brother's records. He was listening to Billy Joel and Styx and Rainbow, but I'd never seen anything like Kiss before. Loud, brash, possessing an iconography that was arresting to say the least. It's still operating within the vernacular of rock and roll, very influenced by, I think, the glam records of the 1970s. Destroyer was the first album I bought. I trundled off to the local record store, and it was the only one they actually had in stock, so that was the first Kiss album I ever owned. Lots of tongue-waggling codpieces and S&M. I had great expectations. Number 6 is Yes and 90125. This was the album that took me on a journey that led me to the landscapery of Roger Dean, and the gorgeous musical palette that this band offered. Those gorgeous guitar noodlings from Steve Howe and the esoteric flights of fancy from the Accrington Warbler, as I call him. Not only those, also those Wakeman-esque Moog passages traversing oceans, eventually landing at close to the edge. I loved this album. I bought the 90125 concert on video, VHS as it was in those days. Of course it was the album live, but it introduced me to a song called Starship Trooper, which to this day is still one of my favourite tracks by this band. Had to check out this track on vinyl, went and bought the Yes album, and the rest, as they say, is history. A lot of traditional Yes fans are a bit sniffy about this album, but this album was the gateway to this band's music for a lot of impressionable souls like myself. Number 5 is Billy Joel's 52nd Street. My brother loved Billy Joel. He was playing his cassettes all the time. And I loved songs like Stiletto and My Life, which seemed rather rebellious at the time, not to mention that beautiful homage to the Righteous Brothers, Until the Night. And of course we get Zanzibar, which is a bit of a tribute to Steely Dan. I think one of the Steely Dan musicians actually played on that. I could be wrong there though. And all the tracks just fit beautifully together, which is a tribute to Ramone's production as well as Billy Joel's melodic craftsmanship. I really enjoyed the jazzier inflections of this album, but there's always something a bit edgy about Billy Joel. Songs like Captain Jack and The Entertainer, which served as an antidote to those sickly sweet Cliff Richard albums my mother liked. Still love Joel to this day. Number 4 is The Doors and the debut album from 1967. This is a dark album, atmospherically at least anyway. It certainly opened up those doors of perception in terms of what could be achieved in terms of mood and ambience, and offered a different vision of the late 60s, for me very much defined by Ichiku Park and Jennifer Eccles. This was apocalyptic stuff with Jim Morrison all leather-trousered, writhing away. The killer awoke before dawn, he put his boots on and walked on down the hall. Absolutely live as well. And Ray Manzarek's organ, steady on there. This is that was a sound that glued this band together, in my opinion. This album was mesmerising, particularly in terms of the awareness of the importance of frontman. The Radiohead lyric, I was listening to Pablo Honey when I went off to university, everyone wants to be Jim Morrison, or something like that. I mean, absolutely. Interesting, Lester Bangs said that Jim Morrison is a drunken buffoon masquerading as a poet, whereas Iggy Pop is a poet masquerading as a drunken buffoon. I think Lester Bangs said that. I think it's attributed to him. The Doors, no doubt for me, foreshadowed my love of The Cure, Echo and the Bunnymen, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, all the gloomy stuff. Number 3 is The Stones and Get Stoned. I don't usually like compilation albums, but this album, from its grotesque sleeves, the dark and lustful strut of the music therein, this served as a chalk to the cheese that was my Beatles Red and Blue albums. There was something unpleasant yet compelling about this band. And I've been a Rolling Stones fan ever since. I loved the persona of Jagger, all lips and arse, face like a chewed toffee, and that sway and swagger of Keith Richards, with the very bored-looking Charlie Watts just keeping things solid. This album felt like something perhaps that I shouldn't be listening to. Number 2 is Adam and the Ants and Kings of the Wild Frontier from 1980. This seemed to be the first musical moment that felt solely mine. This band burst into my life in this explosion of colour, introducing to me the possibilities of what a pop record could and should sound like. All that Burundi drumming, yowls and Ennio Morricone-esque guitar twangings. This walked a brilliant line between campness and art house chutzpah. They were at the forefront of the new wave, just at the end of the dreadful winter of discontent. They exploded into the British popular consciousness and onto the walls of thousands of teenage girls. And Adam Ant, I mean, he was a sight to behold, certainly those early Top of the Pops performances. I so loved Adam Ant at this juncture, I mean, Kings of the Wild Frontier, before it all went a bit panto with Prince Charming, and his solo stuff I'm just not that interested in. And number 1, the most influential record on me ever, was Pink Floyd's The Wall. This came into our house in 1979, soon after its release. I think my brother got it for his birthday. This just blew my mind. I had no idea music could be like this. I seriously played the grooves of this record, from that almost subterranean growl of Roger Waters to the sublime ethereal tones of Gilmour's guitar. With that big concept, the wall, the ultimate symbol of alienation, decorated with those deranged Gerald Scarfe illustrations. I mean, wow. This was the most important album in my life in terms of shaping my future tastes in music. It led me on a journey that would spark a lifelong love of Pink Floyd and lead me to other progressive rock bands. Although this is an album that I fell out of love with some years ago, to be honest with you. I don't even actually own a copy of it anymore. So there you are, they're the 10 albums that shaped my life. If I had to include some honourable mentions, I'd have to include the compilation album Jethro Tull's Living in the Past. Again, I just played that one to death. King Crimson's Court of the Crimson King introduced me to those wonderful tones, the airy tones of the mellotron. Kate Bush, Never Forever. This was a study in weirdness brought into a house by my brother. Beautiful artwork and such strange and eerie music with this wonderful cover of this woman with all these strange beasties flying out of her foo-foo. That's certainly going to capture the imagination of a 15-year-old boy. If you enjoyed this video, please do share it. Click like, subscribe, check that notification bell. Do all that stuff, it's much appreciated. And check some of the links below this video for ways you can support the sterling work done at Classic Album Review. Become a patron, why not? Fine body of work on there now, and we're forming a real classic rock community. I shall just leave you with my closing salvo, which is, hope you're well, staying safe, and of course that you keep listening.